Like a great tooth of rock, it rises sheer out of the Atlantic, 50 miles west of the Outer Hebrides, Stack Lee, and just a few miles north of St. Kilda. On its breezy rock terraces, 500 feet above the Atlantic, nest thousands of pairs of gannets, part of the largest colony in the northern hemisphere of Britain's largest seabird, 120,000 of them. Until St. Kilda was evacuated in 1930, the men of Hurta, the main island, came every year to these stacks to harvest the seabirds. On Borrere's incredible Atlantic pastures, there still thrives to this day a wild flock of their hardy black-faced sheep. St. Kilda is a fitting start to any story of Scotland's heritage. For here, after many years of survival, man lost his battle against the elements and left behind only deserted ruins among scenes of unrivaled wild grandeur. But St. Kilda is unique. Elsewhere, Scotland's story is of a very different struggle, the battle of man against himself. In a quiet corner of the Kingdom of Fife stands Falkland Palace, home of the ill-fated Stuart family, kings of Scotland descended from the daughter of Robert the Bruce. The twin towers of the great gatehouse, designed by French builders, are symbolic of the violence that bedeviled the history of the family. Yet they finally achieved the union of the crowns. There's a strange contrast in the bleakness of a Scottish winter and the cultured elegance of the French designs which James V brought to Scotland in the early 16th century when he built this, the famous south range of the palace. The village of Falkland has no less than 68 listed buildings, like the house of Nicol Moncrief, who ran the royal stables and acknowledged his debt to the crown. Falkland was Scotland's first conservation area and preserves many traditional building techniques like red pantiles on the roofs, painted windows and doorways, and the delightful fashion of inscribing the newlyweds' initials over the door of their house. After the end of the Jacobite risings, a new commercial prosperity and more settled times allowed the great families to embellish their houses and gardens, as the estate of Dunmore did with a brilliantly sculptured stone folly shaped like a pineapple. It's a symbol of Scotland's changing fortunes and new wealth, this exotic foreign fruit in the Scottish winter. But many big houses built in the heyday of that new prosperity have been impossible to preserve against the weather, dry rot and inflation, and like Dunmore House have fallen into decay. So on this estate, only the folly, overlooking the walled garden, has been restored and preserved. Can anyone define Scotland's heritage? What are its real assets? Are they perhaps the wild places like the Torridon Mountains and the great glacial valleys, and highland burns running down into sea lochs like Upper Loch Torridon? The great ranges of windswept hills like the Five Sisters of Kintail, cloud-covered and poised above the waters of Loch Duich. It was in places like these that so much of the Jacobite drama was played out, like the Battle of Glen Shiel, fought here in this valley beneath a mountain still known as the Hill of the Spaniards. And what about the somber places like Glencoe, so often dominated by rain and overshadowed by the cruelty of clan feuds? Beloved of mountain climbers, these rocks are the answer for those who find the challenge going out of life in the welfare state. For these valleys speak of the history of far greater events than just warring families and kings. They tell of the million-year battle between the ice and the rock, so that the heritage here on the summit of Perthshire's highest mountain, Ben Lawers, is in alpine flowers high above the valley of the Tay. No wonder then that thousands come to places like Killin and the Falls of Dochart to explore these magic valleys, to climb the hills and fish the rivers, demanding all the trappings and convenience of the tourist industry. So man's new mobility puts our heritage of countryside under constant pressure. For who would not be drawn to Tayside's unbelievable autumn colours? In winter, the mountains are cruel, and every year brings news of tragic and unnecessary mountain accidents, proving how wide is the gulf between the town dweller and the realities of the countryside. Amongst wildlife like the red deer, only the fit and strong survive. Winter weeds out the weaklings. But the golden eagle will not waste the carcass that he finds in the snow. Scotland in winter is an education and a challenge. In summer sunshine, it's a great place to relax. Many escape the most crowded places by going to islands like Arran on the Clyde. Here at Brodick, 2 samples of Scotland's heritage are cared for by the National Trust for Scotland: Goatfell the Mountain and Brodick Castle. In late May, the Brodick estate is a riot of colour, with acres of bluebells amongst the parkland trees, just outside the wrought iron gates into the fabulous gardens around the castle. Brodick Castle harks back as far as Robert the Bruce, who waited on Arran for the signal to return to the mainland in the Long War. Later it was the home of the Dukes of Hamilton, the last of the line being the 12th Duke's daughter, the Duchess of Montrose in her own right. A couch and a table set for tea in the drawing room are kept just as when the family lived there, under the ornate chandelier and the elaborate plaster ceiling, a classic feature of so many Scottish great houses, and a good excuse to emblazon the whole heraldic history of the family. A 19th century marriage into the family of William Beckford of Fonthill filled Brodick with art treasures, like this magnificent silver centrepiece of Hotspur saying farewell to Lady Percy. Or this charming set of drinking cups made from walrus tusks. Under the silver lids, the rim that touches the lips is silver gilt to avoid tainting the wine. Brodick is a treasure house of silver, porcelain and pictures. Yet surely its greatest richness must be its garden, created in the 1920s largely by the Duchess herself, and featuring what must be one of Britain's finest collection of rhododendrons and azaleas. In the shelter of the woods and beside a natural stream is a pool surrounded by candelabra primulas. The atmosphere is pure magic. Brodick has all the natural advantages a garden needs: shelter, good soils, and the warming effects of the Gulf Stream. Rhododendron magnificum thrives in an almost frost-free climate, a factor even more vital for a tree fern. Few gardens in Britain could produce such a splendid specimen, 16 feet across the crown. Or the huge flowers and brown-backed leaves of rhododendron, aptly named giganteum, with blossoms almost the size of footballs. Brodick displays well one of Scotland's secrets: the subtle blend of the man-made with the natural. The great West Tower in red sandstone designed by Gillespie Graham, or the hybrid rhododendron called Leo, both man's creations set against a colourful natural background. At Crathis Castle in Kincardineshire, it's ponticum, the wild rhododendron that flourishes below the Tower House. Here's yet another connection with Robert the Bruce, who first bestowed lands here on the Burnet family. Centuries later, they built Crathis Castle at the time of Mary Queen of Scots, all turrets and massive stonework without, all colourful painted ceilings within. wooden ceiling panels are supported by beams ornate with texts and proverbs, some of which could be used as guidelines for the trust that now preserves and restores them. Everywhere Scotland's story starts with Robert the Bruce, and that means at Bannockburn, where today's children can file into the new visitor centre to listen to an audiovisual display of how the battle was fought and won, for which I was privileged to record the commentary. This battlefield of Bannockburn, where the Scots strove to regain their independence from England, looks very different today from when they fought in 1314. Modern roads, villages, industry and cultivation, and this centre itself cover some of the natural features which give the site its strategic importance. In 1306, King Robert the Bruce emerged as the leader of the Scots and gradually reduced the English army of occupation to a few scattered outposts, of which Stirling was the key. His foe was not now the formidable King Edward I, but his successor, his weak but stubborn son, Edward II. The basic character of the countryside was the same in 1314. The battle fought here was the culmination of 18 years of struggle. In May, the armies were gathering, and in June, both sides prepared for the coming battle. King Robert chose his position with care and skill. There was a road, old even in 1314, along which the English army would certainly travel. From the hill above, the small folk sense that victory is in sight. They rush down the slope, yelling defiance at the foe. The English think they see a new army. It is the end. The English cause is lost. King Edward has fled the field. The might of England lies dead and dying, drowned in the Bannockburn and trampled in the mud. In 1320, seeking help in persuading King Edward to recognize their independence, the Scots earls and barons wrote a letter to Pope John, the famous Declaration of Arbroath. In impressive Latin prose, they spoke in the name of the whole community of the realm of Scotland. It is not for glory or riches or honours that we fight.
We fight not for glory, nor for wealth, nor for honour, but only and alone we fight for freedom, which no good man surrenders but with his life.
At last, in 1328, a peace treaty set the seal on Scotland's freedom. Wars and alarms have faded. The landscape has changed. But King Robert still sits his horse, his back to Stirling and his face towards the battlefield of Bannockburn, which long ago saw the forging of a nation. And so to another Bruce, Sir George Bruce, coalmaster and industrialist, whose palace was the first building at Corus in Fife to be restored. It is a unique bit of history in stone, with pediments, dormers, pantiles, crow steps, started in 1597, finished in 1611. Linking the church at the top of the hill with the harbour are streets like Tanhouse Brae, leading downhill to the cobbles of the Mercat Cross. Somehow almost the whole royal borough of Corus survived intact from the 16th century to the 20th. It still has, for instance, half a dozen forestairs, leading to an entrance on the first floor, a feature found specially in fishermen's cottages, where the ground floor was often used for storage. Some still show the Fife Harling, the feature selected by the Post Office to represent Scotland in an issue of British Architecture stamps in February 1970. As early as 1936, the Trust held 20 properties in Corus, most notably the Study overlooking the Mercat Cross. The preservation of Corus has appealed to the public's imagination as a first-class illustration of social history. So care has been taken to conserve it, not as a museum, but as a town lived in. It started as a harbour town based on the coal and salt industries, part of the renaissance of Scottish industry under James VI. It is still a living borough with its 17th century townhouse where a painted council room, a debtor's room, a high toll booth and a weighing post or tron are all preserved. Yet Corus is still a home for real people and families, a place for children to grow up in. And so too is remote Fair Isle, halfway between Orkney and Shetland. The mere presence of a school here is a symbol of the island's new future after years of depopulation. Here, a dozen children represent the next generation in an isolated community of only 26 families and celebrate the centenary of their school with a collage depicting the schoolmaster and his pupils of 1878. Today's schoolmaster is as different from his early predecessor as are the children from theirs. Many of them are the sons and daughters of incomers who've been encouraged to settle by the new amenities like electricity and piped water. We now have a community stabilized at about 80 people since the trust took over as landlord in 1954. The original idea was to establish the future of the famous bird observatory. But when you take over an island, you become responsible for those who call it home, crofters mostly. The heritage here is human character, self-reliance and Viking toughness, hardened by the elements, in tune with the pattern of nature, just like the patterns they weave into their knitwear. The schoolhouse stands under the shadow of the Sheep Rock, halfway down the island's 3-mile length. Certainly there's no traffic problem for the children going home. Children's bicycles may be part of a new prosperity, but nearly everything here is still island-made. From the church and the chapel to the roads, fences, dry-stained dikes, and of course, the houses. Many crofts now have a car, so that new skills have to be added to the traditional ones. Stuart Thompson is now a mechanic, as well as a crofter, shepherd, boatman, and fisherman. On Fair Isle, if you want fish, you must catch it, salt it, and dry it yourself. If you want eggs, you keep hens and grow oats to feed them. And if you want winter vegetables, you grow your own kale and potatoes. And this means weeding the rigs, a job for the whole family. It's a way of life many in the cities dream of. Island life is only a tiny part of the Scottish heritage, but it fosters a spirit of self-help and knows nothing of vandalism or delinquency. But don't forget the drawbacks of living almost on the cliff edge on a windswept island that divides the North Sea on the east from the Atlantic beyond the rugged west cliffs. And if life on Fair Isle is tough, at least it's lived against a splendid background. There are many recent improvements to the basic necessities of island life, like the new pier, a more reliable mailboat. But most important of all is a viable population to work the sheep for their wool and knitwear. Sheep Hill, the annual roundup and wool clipping, is still a great day in the Fair Isle calendar. Why did early man live so much on remote islands when the mainland seemed to offer so much more? The reason must have been security. The islands were bleak but safer. Here in wooded Aberdeenshire, men of substance had to build for themselves tower houses of great strength as protection against their enemies. The northeast is full of castles as a result. But of all the castles of Mar, Castle Fraser must rank as one of the largest and grandest. In spacious parkland, with many outbuildings and built on level ground, Castle Fraser shows that the need for a military fortress was past. Yet it took the lifetimes of 2 lairds to finish it by 1636. On the north side of the roof is a great heraldic panel, signed by I. Bell, Master Mason, a craftsman's work of art in solid granite. It's a family house, reflecting more prosperous times when the lairds built themselves grander and more comfortable houses than the old keeps had ever been. But most of the traditional features remain, graceful, well-proportioned, and unmistakably Scottish in style. Drum Castle, only a few miles away, dating from the late 13th century, makes a wonderful setting for reenacting a Wappenshaw or weapons practice, with a public performance by actors from the Sealed Knot.
Come with us into the 17th century. An army is required, and the Laird of Drum has gathered his men and is putting them through their paces, assessing their skills in the use of weapons before they set off to death or victory. Have a care. And have a care again. What's this? Come on.
From the northeast to the far southwest of Scotland, from the heritage of history to coastline conservation, very little of Scotland's coast is safeguarded against development. This beautiful corner of Kirkcudbrightshire lies between Kipford, a yachting centre in the Ur estuary, and Rockcliffe, a quiet but popular holiday village. Only a footpath connects the 2 villages, saving both from the disturbance of through traffic. I'm lucky enough to live here and to enjoy this wonderful setting, for my house is just over there amongst the trees on the other side of the bay. My favourite time is perhaps when the summer visitors have left and autumn is quiet and colourful. On the Ayrshire coast is Culzean Castle, with an estate of more than 500 acres. It was chosen as Scotland's first country park, the perfect answer to the pressure of numbers brought by the success of tourism. All the buildings of the Culzean estate are part of a uniquely coordinated design by Robert Adam, no less. The old farm buildings have been converted into an award-winning visitor centre. The salt in the Ayrshire coast atmosphere eats away at the stonework, and Culzean has recently been in need of expensive repairs. But Adam designs of this quality are always worth repairing, and the conversion of the old stables and cart sheds into one of Europe's finest interpretive centres has been an outstanding success. The castle and garden are still the centrepiece of the country park. It is, of course, conveniently placed for the 2 million population of Strathclyde region. Culzean has the space to absorb thousands of visitors and still preserve the atmosphere of Adam's design, a romantic rural paradise. Once again, we find the magic Scottish blend, man's formal designs making the most of a superb natural background. And here is a climate so mild that even palm trees flourish. Yes, a visit to Culzean is a rich experience by any standards. The Adam magic in an urban setting is best seen in Charlotte Square in Edinburgh's new town, perhaps the finest city square in Europe. The north side is its crowning glory, an 11-house Palladian block. The 3 centre houses are now preserved, with number 7 fully restored as a furnished Georgian house. Here the windows of the wealthy looked up to distant views of the castle, the summit of the High Street, that royal mile down to Holyrood Palace, which had finally become too insanitary and overcrowded to cater for the needs of Scotland's newfound prosperity. The old town was dark and dangerous, and for a century the only possibility of expansion had been upwards. A good example is Gladstone's Land, a house facing the Lawn Market purchased in 1617 by a shipping merchant of that name. When he extended it, he could only build a complete new front onto the house, 1 room and a stair deep, supported at street level by an arcade. It's a superb example of the final limits to expansion of the old tenements, so the restoration of Gladstone's Land conserves the heritage of 17th century Edinburgh. By contrast, the newly restored Georgian house preserves all the symmetry and classical elegance of the 18th century New Town in Edinburgh's golden age. It's still hard to convey to 20th century school children visiting the Georgian house what it was like, even for the wealthy, with no piped water, and before that most wonderfully convenient invention, the WC. By restoring the room authentically furnished, especially the old kitchen, an attempt has been made to convey just how much hard work was involved. Imagine having so many copper pans, and the only method of cleaning them the use of lemon juice, sand, and elbow grease. Life for the gentry was more civilized, but totally dependent on bells, or rather on bell pools upstairs and servants ready to answer the constant summons downstairs. The day would start very early with fires to light and water to heat. With no pipes, water had to be carried everywhere, especially to milady's bedroom. Even soap was a luxury, another modern convenience we just take for granted. Every room had its bell pull, and each bell a different note, so that when coal was needed for the parlour, the maid knew at once what was called for. And on a winter's evening, another bell would mean time to fill the warming pan with embers from the kitchen fire. Servants had virtually no time off and no holidays. Their skills were for other people's comfort, like keeping the warming pan moving so as to air the bed without scorching the sheets. Without this museum of a way of life, it would be hard for us now to imagine just what a Scottish winter would be like without electricity, and lived for the most part by candlelight. Wealth is so hard to define. By some standards, Scotland is still a poor country. By others, it is immensely rich. As we progress towards the 21st century, the richness of our heritage of historic interest and natural beauty becomes more and more obvious. Our assets are clearly more than the short-term benefits of North Sea oil. They include even that other liquid so much of the world is desperately short of, water. When the rain spoils a day of your leisure, remember the arid deserts of the world. With the Earth's resources fast disappearing, we have a new need to revalue our long-term assets, to live in harmony with nature, and to cherish that heritage which has molded the character of Scotland and the Scots. But tourism is an asset too, so it's no use getting lyrical about the rain at Glencoe in the tourist season. Since the National Trust for Scotland acquired Glencoe in the 1930s, it has been kept unspoiled, but there is a new need to provide not just shelter, but information and guidance for understanding the Scottish landscape, and learning to pronounce those difficult Gaelic names. Ben Lawers at sundown could be pure magic, its features picked out in shadows and highlights. But that path to the summit is not just for safety or convenience. It's also a road to a new understanding of the geology, the flora, the meaning of landforms. The new visitor centre, with its car park, its nature trails and its interpretive displays, has become an essential part of the Trust's policy of welcome. Throughout Scotland, you will find a chain of new reception points and purpose-built visitor centres like this one at Thrieve Garden in Kirkcudbrightshire. It is a designed and planned system of information linked by leaflets, publications and helpful staff. Thrieve is one of the newest, but then so is the garden, fast becoming one of the finest gardens in Scotland. At the Grey Mare's Tail, near Moffat in the Border Hills, we can see the Trust system in action. First, the basic facilities, a safe car park, good footpaths and signs, offering a primary means of reaching the objective, in this case a dramatic and picturesque waterfall. Then there's an explanatory display all about the area and its natural history, and a viewpoint conveniently near the road. The map relates the site to its surroundings, and there are plenty of warnings about the dangers, which are real and call for constant vigilance. But most important of all is the man on the spot, the ranger naturalist who can provide far better than general information, his own experience to answer specific questions, his own enthusiasm to make the visit even more memorable. Only a ranger on the spot can provide a real check on safety and a watchful eye over those inexperienced in country ways, or perhaps the daredevils from a school party. With help from the Countryside Commission for Scotland, there are now ranger naturalists at many trust properties. Other facilities, much valued by visitors, are good picnic sites like this one by the river at the Hermitage near Dunkeld. Then there are guided walks from several car parks, with a leaflet available on the spot to take with you. If there's a ranger on the spot to answer your questions personally, that's even better.
Well, it all depends what you want to see. You said you were heading up the A9? I think that the map will show you the best way to go. It's Killiecrankie.
There are several trust properties on the A9 north of Perth for visitors stopping off the main road to Inverness and the Highlands. With vastly improved access to the beauty spots, there's all the more need for the Trust's provision to be really up to date and effective in this way. There's both natural beauty and historic interest at Killiecrankie. And so in the visitor centre we find a superb model of the battle that explains in dramatic detail how Bonnie Dundee with 2,500 clansmen won the first battle in the Jacobite cause in 1689 against 6 regiments of King William's troops under General Mackay. A Highland charge suffered heavy casualties but won the day, though it cost Dundee his life. Killiecrankie was the first battle for the king over the water. Culloden was the last. Here too the Trust provides a modern reception centre. It caters for the thousands of visitors to the site of the last pitched battle fought on British soil in 1746, when over 1,000 clansmen lost their lives. Culloden has an indefinable atmosphere, so that in addition to new techniques of display, there's still a need to preserve Old Dianach Cottage as part of the heritage, and perhaps to be used as a background for a family snapshot. Battle sites are a focus of history, and these children from a York school are completing Bannockburn worksheets designed by the Trust and taking it all very seriously. But who can say if their experience is more real than the Glasgow children tackling the wall of the Rotunda like an assault course as their own private expression of independence? Over 1 million visitors come to Trust properties every year. It's an indication of the public appreciation of the quality of the heritage it safeguards. Who's to say which are the more valuable properties? Castles like Crathes or Craigie Var, unchanged since the day it was built? Or Kelly Castle in a corner of Fife? Or the great country houses like the Binns near Linlithgow? Or Leith Hall in Aberdeenshire? Or the many smaller properties like both Ducat or Fife Coast houses at Pittenweem and Cellardyke? Or the Customs House at Crail? All preserve vanished standards and past styles in slate or tile or stonework, craftsmanship in the use of natural materials, of design showing the alliance of cultural influences from abroad and original Scottish artistry. So that ornate plaster ceilings of Italian origin replaced ceilings in tempera paint on wooden panels, and beams full of native wit and wisdom. The slothful hand maketh poor, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. But how far should diligence go? Preserving the wilderness is, to some, a contradiction in terms. It certainly demands careful use of natural materials and the highest standards. Commercial aspects call for careful control. Trust shops sell no trash. Quality goods or educational value are guidelines. Development must be sensitive, using only the best of modern design to enhance the best from the past. And the whole operation is dependent on a select and dedicated staff who get all too little credit for being amongst the most willing and versatile of employees, ready to turn their hands to almost any task that needs doing. Many of the skills demanded are ordinary but painstaking. Many are the result of years of experience. Take John Basford, for example, head gardener at Brodick, and probably the best rhododendron grower in Scotland, if not in Europe. He demonstrates 20 years of experience in creating a new hybrid by a skillful cross-pollination technique. No wonder he's won so many first prizes for the trust at the Royal Horticultural Society shows, and even the coveted gold medal. And yet the results of his work are available any spring at Brodick for all to enjoy. This kind of diligence over the heritage of Scotland is the hallmark of the Trust. It deserves your support and mine as members for as long as we live.